pretty tough on you as a real estate agent, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, buy a house for me. The cops come dig up your yard.
Yeah.
What a sales pitch.
Yeah.
For real.
Yeah. They had a bail hearing, and a federal prosecutor at that hearing told the judge that she had heard Steve on tape saying, quote, "I wish I hadn't harmed her. It was the cocaine," unquote.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, this quote also appears in the indictment, which said it happened on January 21st, 1998.
Hadn't harmed her.
Yeah.
Do people speak like that in real life?
Yeah, I know, yeah.
I wish I hadn't harmed her.
The indictment also quotes Marlene as saying on December 23rd, 1997, quote,
"The baby's dead and buried. It was found dead because you did it. The baby's dead no matter what you say. You just did it."
unquote. And Steve reportedly replied, quote,
"Honey, there was nothing I could do about it. We need to discuss the way we can beat the charge. I would never break the family pact in our story, even if the police were to hold me down. We will do what we have to do."
unquote. And the indictment has a few other incriminating conversations. I won't recite them all.
No, we won't.
No, there's no reason to, but it was pretty damning evidence. And you got to wonder why the Eisenbergs were being charged with lying and obstruction rather than murder.
Oh.
You got to wonder.
Might have something to do with that.
Oh,
It's a gateway charge.
Yeah.
Just like the cocaine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So things are looking kind of dark for the Eisenbergs at this point, but then when they finally got their day in court, the prosecution's case kind of fell apart because when the tapes were actually played in court and the incriminating statements that were in the indictment, well, they couldn't actually be heard on the tapes.
Did it sound like Turn Me On, Dead Man?
It was a house made of masking tape and cardboard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Reportedly, the judge, I think his name was Pizzo, I can't remember his first name, reportedly he said to the prosecutors, "Is this all you've got?" Unquote.
After listening to the tapes, yeah.
Yeah. Reporter for the St. Petersburg Times who was there described the tapes as, quote, "sounding like chickens squawking with a hurricane playing in the background," unquote.
That's pretty impressive.
Well, you know, somebody was saying that it was very unclear if it wasn't the television.
Well, that was one of the things that I think they did really wrong, right? Is that they didn't have any way. You have seen The Wire, right?
Yeah.
So you know that, like, at least in The Wire,
You videotape as well as audio.
well, you at least have to, like, prove that that person was on a phone at that time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the police having no way of corroborating if these are conversations that are being had in real life. It's the radio, it's kids, it's, you know, neighbors, it's people breaking into the house for all they know, having these conversations. They have no way to know any of that stuff. They just have these recordings.
Yeah, but besides which, on top of that, it was all gibberish anyway.
Well, and could you imagine if it was something if the kids were playing a game that was something along the lines of like Grand Theft Auto?
Yeah.
Which is nothing but gunfire and screaming and swearing and people die and all kinds of dialogue? Like, yeah. And then it's, this is just asinine.
Yeah. So it was kind of a waste of time. The judge, of course, threw out the case.
Yeah.
And I heard that the two prosecutors who brought the case to court were demoted afterwards.
That's all?
Yeah, I don't understand why they weren't fired and disbarred.
Well,
because bringing false evidence in front of a judge is a pretty serious prosecutorial abuse.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like these guys maybe were under pressure to make something happen, and it may have been a bit of confirmation bias. That's the only phrase. It's the only way I can think of describe where you've got to hear something and then you start hearing something and you convince yourself that it's something nefarious.
We literally just talked about this not too long ago in the Paul is Dead.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Right? I mean, anytime we talk about when somebody says, you know, you put a video up and you subtitle it, suddenly you're like, oh yeah, that totally says that, or oh yeah, I can kind of hear that.
Well, that's it. I think that I don't want to totally say these guys were trying to frame the Eisenbergs, but
they may have been very misguided in their attempts.
Well, the thing about it is, it's maybe what they were counting on is like what you're talking about. We have these transcripts which are going to be entered into evidence, and the jury will be looking at them. They'll be listening to the tapes too, but if they're reading and listening to the tape at the same time, then they'll just be thinking, yeah, I guess it kind of sounds like that. They're saying that, maybe. Yeah, okay, sure, good enough.
What's the saying? It's like when you live in the monkey house, you like stop smelling the poop, right? I mean, if you're in that for so long, so I think that it's totally possible that was what was happening to the police. You know, at some point, people are like, I don't know, did they? Yeah, they probably did. I don't know. Well, what evidence do we have? Well, we have those tapes, and you hear those, you know, and they just kept going back and forth, and suddenly they weren't smelling the poop anymore.
Yeah, you're probably right.
I don't.
Yeah,
know.
it's a situation where I can't remember who it was. It's a friend of ours made the statement of where these prosecutors were in a situation, use an analogy as similar to yours, which is they were in a situation where they had to turn chicken poop into chicken salad.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's about it. Well, they never succeeded. Their case was thrown out, as I said. The Eisenbergs sued and won. I'm not going to get into all that stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That went on for years.
It did. It did. Finally ended in October 2004 when their appeal to the Supreme Court was rejected by the Supreme Court. But they did win. The thing they were appealing is that
they did win?
That they won, but they won substantial amount of money for legal fees, and then that was cut in two by the appeals court, and then they appealed to the Supreme Court, which basically just declined to hear their case.
Well, and I think part of the reason that the Supreme, if I remember reading it, correct me if I'm wrong here, Joe, wasn't it they declined the case because it would set a precedent where anybody could sue the prosecutor's office. Basically sue them for doing their job, which opened them up to a whole nother bag of tricks that they shouldn't be worried about.
I'm not sure if that was the same one, but I think the Supreme Court, I don't think they even commented on.
Oh, see, I remember, or maybe it was somebody else that made a statement about it.
I think it was a different lawsuit. I think they wanted to actually sue or have the prosecution prosecuted themselves, but there was prosecutorial immunity.
Okay,
and all that
may be it.
Yeah.
I just remember it was one of those things like, well, yeah, it's a snake chasing its own tail.
Yeah. So, but anyway, that's not that relevant to our mystery anyway. So yeah, we're not going to bother anymore with that. There was not a lot of movement after that in the case. No reports that I know of.
Well, let's be honest. There wasn't a whole lot of movement in the case for Sabrina after about the first 3 days.
Yeah, not really. Well, I mean, there was some movement in the sense of getting sightings, reports of sightings. Although that doesn't really.
Okay, 3 months.
That doesn't really move things along.
No.
It's not useful. So yeah. This thing just sort of became a cold case almost immediately. There was a report, I guess, in July 2008, there was a report in the Tampa Bay Times. I assume you guys saw that.
Yeah.
So a guy named Dennis Byron, who was a jailhouse snitch, he said his cellmate Scott Overbeck had confessed to taking part in Sabrina's demise. Overbeck said that he had been called to the Eisenberg home by an unnamed third party to retrieve a small boat that had a dead baby in it. Yeah, he said that he chopped the body up and used the parts to, this is a little tacky here, but to bait crab traps, which he then dropped into Old Tampa Bay to the west of town. You can see it on maps. And I checked, apparently the crabbing is pretty good in the bay. Not so much in late November, but there are a lot of crabs in that bay.
I gotta say, it would take a very particular kind of person to be able to commit that.
Chop up a dead baby?
Yes, to be able to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, to do it regardless of what you were doing with the remains afterwards. This guy, if he could do that, I would imagine that he was the coldest SOB in the planet and should have been in trouble for a lot of other things because...
He was in trouble. He was in jail. But.
Right, but much more heinous crimes. He obviously had no qualms about that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's just... That surpasses Dexter level to me.
Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah, it kind of is. But for all we know, the guy was probably lying. I've always had a problem with jailhouse snitches, by the way. Yeah,
me too.
And if you're on the jury, don't trust the jailhouse snitch. Take it with a grain of salt.
Well, that's because the prosecutors love to use them.
Yeah, and abuse them, much so. Although in this case, the police had wired up a Sony Walkman as a listening device and given it to Byron to take in.
I thought all Walkmans were listening devices.
Yeah, good point. But to listen in the other direction.
A recording device.
Yeah, so they had recordings of Overbeck's statements. But on the other hand, the Eisenbergs said that they had never owned a boat, and I couldn't find any confirmation one way or the other, but you got to assume that the police pulled out all the stops to find out if they ever owned a boat, right? And there's ways to do that, by the way. I mean, you ask the neighbors, did they have a boat parked in their driveway? And also you go down, you got to register your boat and put numbers on it and stuff. So, you can go see if they registered their boat. And so there's ways to find out if they had a boat, right?
So, For what? Okay, listen. I'm going to make it very clear here that I am on the side of the family in this story. This is one of the ones where I can't jump both sides for the most part. But in this part, there is a whole bunch of ways. You're going to buy a boat from a guy, but you don't have an actual contract with the guy. Instead, you say, listen, you hold the note. You and I know it's on a handshake deal. I'm going to pay for it over time. We're going to keep it at the dock. You keep the paperwork, so then it's never in their name.
But yeah,
people do that with collateral all the time.
Well, yeah, but Overbeck said that he actually retrieved it from their home. It was parked at their home.
Oh,
and it had a date. And Sabrina's body was already in it.
I misread it because when I read his stuff, I swore that he retrieved the boat from where it was docked. I thought it was. I didn't take it as. I didn't remember it being in their drive.
What was Overbeck in jail for?
I can't remember now. It was not actually. It wasn't something hideously heinous. It was. I don't think it was for murder or anything like that.
I just kind of wonder if, I know this is really messed up, but I kind of wonder if he was trying to bulk up his cred.
Yeah, it could be.
That's a very
don't
good
mess
point.
with me. I did this thing.
I'm so heartless.
You don't want to come at me in jail. I'm not to be trifled with. This is a thing I did.
Yeah, it could be that.
Right?
It could be that Byron actually put the Walkman under a pillow and said, "Hey, dude, let's have some fun with the prosecutors here."
Yeah.
It's
hard to tell.
That thing is a bug. So hey, why don't you confess to something incredibly lurid?
Yeah. And that's actually that. Now that you say that, that's a great way to get in with somebody. We're going to pretend incriminate you for something that we know cannot be true because we're making it up as we go.
Yeah, exactly.
And so then suddenly you're on board. You're a player in the game. So for the guy who's recording it, gets him some credit.
Yeah. So and I got to say the other thing about jailhouse snitches is that if you're ever in jail for murder, if they've ever put you in jail and you're suspected. And some guy sits down next to you and says, "Hey, what you in for?" Yeah, you got to say murder. And he says, "Really? What'd you do?" And you got to say, "Well, this guy was pissing me off, so I chloroformed him. I tied him up with bungee cords, and when he came to, I chained him up and lowered him slowly into a vat of hydrochloric acid." and then let him take that back to the prosecutors. And,
Yeah.
So
well, I put him in a well. I lowered a bucket with lotion in it, and I said, "Put some lotion on its skin."
Yeah.
No, actually, I custom built a really huge trebuchet, and I threw it.
Okay, so are we?
Oh yeah, let's get back to our story here. And it's been, as of right now, it's been almost 20 years since Sabrina vanished, and not a single trace of her has been found. Nothing.
Yeah.
So I know that we're about to get into the theory section, but I think we'd be a little remiss if we don't talk about a little bit of some of the footage that is of the parents when they go on TV. Because Steve and Marlene
Are you talking about like Larry King?
Larry King or the Geraldo and stuff like that. This is one of those weird cases where I felt like I got as much information from news reporting, actual videos, as I did from the written stuff, where normally I avoid the videos.
But the Geraldo segment was pretty good, actually.
You know what that reaffirmed for me?
What's that?
Why I hate Nancy Grace. Because that broad is a giant liar.
Yeah.
Oh, she's horrible. But that's not my point. My point is, people talk about how heartless these people are, how just cold they are. Okay, their daughter was stolen, according to what they say. I get that we can't just say that's what happened. But their child is gone. They are beaten up by the media, they are beaten up by the police, they are beaten up by the prosecutor's office, and they are on TV a gajillion times. Do you not think that after a while it just begins to?
Well, yeah, and of course time passes too.
Yes.
Obviously, this is the...
You're not a blubbering mess for the next 50 years whenever the words are uttered.
You do get over it,
Well, even if you don't get over it, you learn how to cope. And how to respond to it. It's like Steve, people talk about him being so cold and mechanical, but he was in real estate. And Joe, you and I asked you this earlier. So I don't remember what it was he did for a living before or after the whole real estate thing.
Yeah, I forgot. It was some sort of delivering, installing stuff, and I can't remember
computer
what the hell
stuff.
Maybe.
I mean,
maybe
he
something
seems
like
like a very technical guy, and he seems like he just has a very deliberate way about him. He's very emotionless by nature, and I don't mean that as a slur.
Well,
Just the way he reacts, and yet
some
at
people,
the same time, I watched that guy freak out on TV. I mean, he got very angry.
I remember that. I remember the one you were talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, well, how do you call him not emotional? Well, yeah, of course he's not crying over the fact that his daughter is gone 6 or 9 months later because he's cried himself out, but he still has emotion. He still loses it.
Yeah.
But people don't want to attribute that to actual feelings. It feels really weird to me the way that this case has just been so... It's polarized.
Well, it's not just this case, right? It's any time that kids disappear.
It's true.
Parents, there's such a spotlight put on the parents to react exactly the right way.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And if they don't react exactly how everybody thinks they should, right? They should be teary, but not like in a fake, weird, dramatic way. And they should be like very stoic the entire time and never smile, and
but they can't just be too stern about it,
right? But they can't, because they also can't come off as though like they were maybe like distant and abusive while the child was there, and like it's just like, oh my god, like these people are human beings going through a thing, and like we're putting the spotlight on them. Of course they're not going to like stack up. Of course they're not.
Yeah.
Nobody does.
No.
And probably, when you go out in public, you behave a little differently than you do in private.
Yeah.
And most of us don't want to be seen crying on national TV.
I mean, there's also the question of like what kind of household did Steve grow up in? Was it okay for guys to cry? Mm-hmm. Right?
Maybe
or
not.
was he meant to be holding it in? Was that a stigma?
To be a man.
Right, to be a man, stiff upper lip.
Yeah.
Just hold it in, and like the way that he expressed his emotion again is that anger outburst, and that like he thought, I can't cry, I'm a man. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah. It's something as simple as like, maybe you don't mind if your neighbor sees you cry, but you really don't want your father seeing you cry.
Right.
And your dad's going to see you on TV.
Right.
So you're going to hold it in.
Right.
So, but anyway, enough about this speculation about emotion.
Well, yeah, no, we're right. I mean, and just again to reiterate for everybody, this is something that happens to parents no matter what their age of their children are.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I've talked about the book before, The People Who Eat Darkness. Mm-hmm. That book, the girl was, I think she was 20 or 22 when she disappeared, and the same kind of speculation about the family's reactions that we just talked about here were thrust upon the parents of a 20-some-odd-year-old woman. Mm-hmm. So it's universal.
Yeah.
It's despicable, but it's universal.
It's like the Dingo Ate My Baby chick, and then years go by, and she's the most hated woman in Australia, and then they finally find her baby's skeletal remains. It wasn't the remains, but I think it was the blanket. They found the blanket in a dingo den. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so it looks like she was telling the truth. Gee, gee, haters, how do you feel about yourself now?
Yeah.
Justified?
Yeah.
Come on, let's be justified and talk about theories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into our theories.
Okay.
Yeah. I divided theories into two subsets.
Yeah, you did.
I know I did.
You're learning.
Yeah, I know. I've been trained by the best. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So first is Steve and Marlene are telling the truth. And the second set is they're lying.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah.
There's weird. I just noticed something weird in your note. Is that you've abbreviated these people, and so they become S&M.
Yeah.
I know.
But only when they're like bad.
It really threw me off. I was like, "What? This is a theory I didn't know about."
Yeah, S&M is lying. I didn't know that either. I didn't know that was possible. Oh, okay. Let's start out. So the parents knew nothing. They truly knew nothing. So the theories under that would be Sabrina was abducted and murdered by a random killer.
That's extremely abnormal for a baby of that age.
It just seems unlikely to me that somebody would just be going down the street in a cul-de-sac. By the way, did I mention it was a cul-de-sac?
Yeah.
Yeah, and happen to see an open garage door and just think, hey, I'll walk over there and see if the door to the house is unlocked. And hey, guess what it is? Maybe I'll go see if I can abduct a child and take them out in the woods and murder them.
Yeah, that's silly.
That's not a thing.
Yeah.
And then another theory that's been put out there by people is the whole devil worshipping cult thing. Same theory, yeah.
Satanic panic.
Satanic
oh, God,
panic,
yes.
Yeah. And so I'm finding all that whole thing just not credible.
Satanic
So-
panic wasn't a real thing.
Not really. No.
So that's this. No, this theory doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's move on to the next
up.
theory. Okay, abduction for sale. And of course, there's also just abduction by somebody who's baby crazy. So I guess that comes to a whole, 3 theories there.
Yeah, we need to explain. When you say baby crazy, Joe, you mean there's a condition for folks, and crazy is the wrong term to use, but it's just
Yeah, but people who really want a child, but for whatever reason can't have one,
are unable to. Yes.
Yeah,
and
and
therefore
so-
resort to stealing someone else's child.
Yeah, this is not unknown. But so let's do the abduction, the baby crazy one first. That would mean somebody really, really wanted a child, and they stalked the family for God knows how long, and
No more than 5 months.
yeah, obviously, but they stalked them for a while probably because they had to get an idea of where they lived and everything, and sort of get an idea of hey, they leave the garage door open, hey, we can go jimmy the lock, and hey, that night we locked out, they didn't even lock the lock, and we went in there and found the baby and took it. And Sabrina was a cute kid. She was a cute little baby.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go on record and say I hate this theory, but
I do too.
It actually explains something to a degree, which is, let's say that said people who are in need of a baby, whether for emotional reasons or financial reasons, happen to live on the other side of the fence. They walk around, they see the door is open, that person walks in, opens the baby, they're...
Nope, don't open the baby. Just gonna throw that out there.
That's kind of creepy.
It is pretty creepy.
Yeah.
The door is open and they take the baby. Thank you for correcting that. And then they walk to the back fence where their accomplice, who is in the house, is at the fence, and hand the baby over the fence. And then they go back out the front door, thus eliminating the need to walk around the block with a potentially crying baby.
Or, where you might be seen. On the other hand, however, it seems like the police search was fairly extensive, and they probably would have just at least casually searched people's houses. But
that doesn't mean that the people who wanted the baby and were staying at that house were the people who lived in that house. It could be my wife and I want a baby, and I'm staying with my aunt and uncle for an extended stay, let's say 2 weeks, and I realize they have it, and the day before I'm supposed to leave, I'm out on a walk and I realize it, and I'm like, holy crap, honey, they've left the door open. We can have a Raising Arizona moment.
Yeah, we can add that
at
baby.
which point, we just leave in the night and leave a note that say we had to go, and then we show up months later. It's well, we didn't want to tell anybody, but she was actually pregnant. Ha ha ha! It's a total Raising Arizona situation.
yeah, there are some issues with this, though.
There are.
There's a ton of issues.
that would have been interesting. It would have been really coincidental that the people right behind them wanted a baby real bad.
Well, that's why I'm saying it's somebody that isn't the neighbor, so that they're gone.
Yeah.
When the search begins.
But more than that, right? I mean, so say that somebody did abduct this baby and then chose to raise it on their own. But we live in America, and you need things like a birth certificate or a social security number or card. I mean, you can get a replacement card, right? We've discovered that, but you need your number.
Yeah, it's kind of good to have.
You can get a replacement birth certificate, but you need some proof of you saying you are who you are.
Yeah.
And there's just a lot of stuff you need.
It's hard. It would be hard to explain because, say you're adopted by this family, and you go out and you actually get a birth certificate for somebody who was born about the same time that you died. It's harder to do these days. You can still do that, but the problem is then you got to figure out a way to explain the fact that you've got this kid.
So we're all making a giant mistake here.
That it's in America?
No, that everybody has a child in a hospital. It is entirely possible that somebody could file the paperwork and say, I had my child at home, I didn't have a midwife with me, it just happened, and we've got our baby. I mean, people do that. It's not common, but it's not unheard of that home births happen and they are unattended, and it is very difficult to get the proper paperwork after the fact. But if this child is like 6 months old, you can flub that. You can fudge it and say, you can make up some stuff, and by the time that you've filed your paperwork and they come around eventually, the child is months older than that, they may not ever figure it out.
That's true.
It's entirely possible. Is it plausible? I don't think so, but it is entirely possible.
If you were smart and you planned it well, that's one of the things you could do is you could file the paperwork once Sabrina was like 3 months old.
And you knew what she looked like. And she has dark hair, dark eyes, and about X number of pounds. Yeah.
Yeah, and then by the time they finally come around to have a look at her, she's a couple of months older, and you don't even consider that she's Sabrina because you filed your paperwork like 2 months before.
Yeah.
Kidnapping. She looks uncomfortably like Sabrina, but it can't be. You filed your paperwork way back when.
Yeah.
Right?
That's a level of premeditation.
And of course, you've also dyed her hair like blonde. Yeah.
Well, and that's the sort of thing you would have to do, right? Because I think to make the assumption, babies progress in a very predictable way, especially in that first year of life. And so to say they wouldn't notice a couple months, it's like, they probably would, though.
Everything I know about social workers and people who are in that profession, the workload, I'm not knocking them, but their workload.
I'm not talking about social workers, though. I'm talking about doctors. Like, you take her for her baby wellness checkup at 6 months, and she's actually like 8 months. They're gonna know.
So if what Joe says
they would have to premeditate,
that would make it a lot more believable.
But that would have to have been really premeditated, and it would have had to been local.
Yeah, very much so. Or some incredible professionals,
right.
Guys that are like international crime level kind of thing that were hired by rich people.
Oh, so it's Baby Impossible level,
kind of like that. Yeah, we're talking Tom Cruise here.
Yeah, but I guess at that point it's kind of like if they are Baby Impossible level, right? Trees and then shipping them over here as they're adopted.
Why not?
Sadly, it turns out that is much easier and affordable.
Yeah, I don't know, but
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so much for that. That whole theory, abduction by baby crazy, abduction for sale. I think that's a similar thing.
Yeah, I think it's unlikely.
They're all unlikely. So let's look to our next set of theories.
Well, it's actually that's the one I like the most.
Which one's that?
The abduction for keeping.
Oh, that one.
That's the one I want.
That's the one you like.
That's my preferred favorite here.
In your emotional heart of hearts.
That's what I would.
That's what I want.
Oh yeah,
too.
no. This girl is at this point. If this is true, she
18 years old.
18?
18,
She would be 18 right now.
18. So I really want this to be some 18-year-old girl whose biggest concern is should she or should she not date Bobby Johnson?
Yeah, rather than somebody who's dead and rotting in a grave somewhere.
Right. Something terrible has happened to. So that's why I'm just going to keep saying. Just think of Bobby Johnson.
You realize, one of our listeners might actually be Sabrina. So if you're 18, Sabrina, of course you're not called Sabrina. Check your birth certificate.
Maybe. That might be coincidental.
Yeah. But yeah.
Well, okay. Subset theory number 2.
Yeah, which is the parents did know something.
Okay.
Yeah. It does kind of look like they maybe knew something. I left one little detail out from the story of that first day. You remember what I said? The police put a tap on the Eisenberg's phone?
Yeah.
Yeah, just in case a kidnapper called. One of the first calls that came in that morning was from Steve's brother Dave, who I'd mentioned earlier, who was a lawyer, and who called him up and told him he should be careful what he said to the police and that he should lawyer up, etc. Yeah, and when they were talking, and the police were listening in on this conversation, they heard a beep, which was call waiting. Somebody was calling in. And surprisingly, Steve didn't take the call. Yeah, and eventually the caller rang off. You know what that sounds like? Doo, 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 doo.
Yeah, I've hung up tone.
Yeah. And Steve and Dave kept talking, and then another call came in, and once again, Steve blew the call off.
Yeah, he was really concerned about her having been kidnapped.
Apparently he didn't believe for a second that she'd been kidnapped.
I have to ask a question.
Yeah.
which is, have you never seen what happens to anybody that's in the media spotlight?
Yeah.
Everybody and their mom calls them from news agencies to talk.
Yeah.
So it could very well have been that they were getting gajillions of, "Hi, this is so-and-so from ABC News Channel 7 wanting to talk about your missing child. Can we talk with you?" "No, go away." "Hi, this is